The door opened slowly. Dark shadows covered the light. Jake Morgan was 32 years old and had made many bad choices before. He pushed the door wide open. This time he would do things right. In the corner, Maria sat crouched down. She was beautiful with bronze skin that shone in the dim light. Her body was curved like smooth stone. She wore torn black underwear that barely covered her. Sweat ran down her neck. Her long black hair fell over one shoulder. Her dark eyes looked right at him with fierce strength. His heart raced with want when he saw her. "You've seen me like this, cowboy," she said in her Apache accent. "Marry me or we're both dead." His hand gripped the door frame tight. He could see her breathing fast. He knew about Apache lands and the danger of crossing lines. Heavy footsteps and drunk voices came closer. Jake stepped inside and shut the door. The air between them felt thick with unspoken feelings. Jake put his long coat around Maria's small body. They jumped through the window into the muddy back street. When he lifted her by the waist, he felt how warm her skin was through the thin cloth. She didn't pull away. Her hands held his shoulders. For a moment that felt like forever, they were close enough to share breath. He could smell sage in her hair and feel her shake, but not from fear. "This way," he whispered. She followed without asking questions. Their wagon rolled out of Las Cruces with riders chasing behind them. Inside the covered wagon bed, Maria sat wrapped in his coat. Jake felt every mile stretch between them like a tight rope. The coat had opened a little, showing the curve of her thigh where her dress had torn. She saw him look quickly and pulled the cloth closed. Not from shame, but with the careful control of a woman who knew the power of such glimpses. When she asked where he was taking her, her voice carried something new. Not just tiredness, but a kind of testing, like she was checking what kind of man he was. "North," he said, "until it's safe." But safety felt like something neither of them could have. Every time he looked back, her dark eyes watched him. The campfire painted her face in gold and shadow. Maria had fixed his torn coat with quick, sure stitches, making it stronger than before. As she worked, the firelight caught her neck and the way her lips pressed together as she focused. When she leaned forward to bite off the thread, her loose dress showed the hollow of her throat. Jake found himself looking down to where shadows began. When she handed the coat back, their fingers touched. The touch seemed to last longer than needed. "In the room," she said quietly, "you didn't look at me the way they did." "Why?" Jake met her eyes across the flames. "Because I've seen what happens when men stop seeing a woman as a person." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Something changed between them. A door opening just a crack. They slept on opposite sides of the fire that night. But Jake found himself listening to her soft breathing, aware of every small move she made in sleep. Once when she turned in her bedroll, the coat slipped from her shoulder. Moonlight painted her bare arm silver. He looked away, but the image stayed behind his closed eyes. Dawn came gray and cold. Maria knelt by the creek to wash. Jake watched from the corner of his eye. She had taken off his shirt and washed wearing just her dress. The thin cloth, wet from washing, clung to her body, showing her curves. When she bent to cup water, the dress pulled tight across her hips. Jake felt his mouth go dry. She stood up, catching his look. For a moment neither spoke. Then she put his shirt back on, but her movements were slow, as if she wanted him to see. Like she wanted to test how honorable he was. "They're coming," she said simply. Her sharp ears heard what his distracted mind had missed. 3 riders appeared on the hill like messengers of hell. Jake knew the leader's ugly grin from the boarding house. The man who had laughed outside her prison door. "Stay inside," Jake said, checking his rifle. But when the fight came, Maria didn't hide in the wagon. Her voice rose clear and strong. "If you shoot, they'll kill you before you can reload." "I know," Jake replied, never taking his eyes off the leader. The tension stretched tight. The leader's eyes kept looking at the wagon, hungry and wanting. Jake stepped in his way, blocking the view. It was then he understood. She wasn't just someone to protect. She was becoming his partner in this deadly dance. The riders turned and rode away. But not before the leader spit his promise, We'll be seeing you, freight man. That night they camped closer together. As they shared their small supper, Maria's knee touched his and she didn't pull away. The simple contact sent heat racing through his body. You could have fought them today, she said quietly. Fight when you have to, Jake replied. Hide when it keeps you alive. And you'd hide again. From me. For as long as I have to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth from her skin. When she looked at him in the firelight, her eyes held a new kind of question. One that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with the current that hummed between them. The second day brought heat that made the air shimmer like water. Maria wore only her dress during the day, his coat folded beside her in the wagon. As they traveled, Jake found himself watching for danger and stealing looks at his companion. When she moved to adjust the canvas cover, her movements were smooth and graceful. The dress, worn soft from use, showed every curve of her body. She caught him watching once and held his gaze with steady eyes, a small smile at the corners of her mouth. Apache women aren't taught to be ashamed of their bodies, she said simply. We're taught to know their power. The words hung between them like a challenge. By midday they stopped near a shallow creek. Maria stepped down from the wagon. Jake watched her strong calves as she walked over the stones. When she knelt to drink, the dress pulled tight and he had to look away. They would have killed you too, she said when he joined her at the water's edge. Jake nodded. I figured. That's what you meant back in the room, she explained. She told him about the Apache way. How being seen undressed by a white man made her worthless for trade. A problem to be killed. How the man who saw her faced the same fate. As she spoke, she began to untie her dress at the throat, getting ready to wash. The action was innocent enough, but it made Jake's pulse quicken. Doesn't sound like any of it's worth keeping, he said quietly, his voice rougher than intended. She paused, studying his face. Maybe not. But it brought you to me. The words hung between them like a confession. When she went back to washing, Jake turned away to give her privacy. But not before he saw her smile. The first truly soft look he'd seen from her. The riders came at dawn. 3 shadows against the pale sky. This time the leader's patience had worn thin. Jake stepped onto the wagon bench, rifle in hand. Behind him he heard Maria moving, the soft whisper of cloth against skin as she pulled on his coat. Morning, the leader called, his tone mocking. We're looking for a girl. Apache. Small. Might have been wearing not much the last time we saw her. Jake kept his voice level. Nobody here you need to worry about. The man's grin widened. See, that's where you're wrong, freight man. She's coming with us. She's my wife, Jake replied evenly. The lie rolled off his tongue like truth. The words seemed to echo in the morning stillness. From behind him came Maria's sharp breath, but she didn't argue. The leader's face darkened. Piece of paper won't stop me. Maybe not, Jake said, raising the rifle. But this will. The standoff stretched tight. Jake's finger rested against the trigger. Something in his eyes must have convinced the leader that there would be no more warnings. Ain't worth dying over today, the man muttered, turning his horse around. As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Maria climbed onto the wagon bench beside him. She'd left his coat open and the morning breeze pressed the dress against her body, showing her form clearly. You didn't have to tell him I was your wife, she said softly. I did, Jake replied, trying not to notice how the cloth had gone nearly see-through in the early light. It was the only thing that made him stop. She studied him for a long moment, then reached for his free hand. Her fingers were warm, rough from hard work, but surprisingly gentle as they wrapped around his. If you're going to claim it to keep me safe, she said, you might as well mean it. The words settled between them like a promise. They made camp early that day, choosing a hidden spot among cottonwood trees where the creek ran clear and cold. As the sun began to set, painting the sky gold and red, Maria surprised Jake by cooking a better meal than usual. She'd caught fish from the creek and cooked them wrapped in wild greens she'd gathered. As she worked, kneeling by the fire, the dress pulled tight across her hips and thighs. Every movement was naturally sensual. The way she bent forward to tend the flames. how she tucked hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist. "You've done this before," Jake said, settling beside her. "My grandmother taught me before." She didn't finish the sentence, but he understood. As they ate, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, Maria began to speak of her life before the capture. She spoke of morning rides across the desert, of ceremonies under starlight, of a world where she had been valued for more than her body's worth to men. "I had chosen not to marry," she said quietly. "I wanted to be a warrior, to ride with the men. My father said I was too proud. That pride would be my downfall." Jake watched the firelight play across her face. "Maybe pride brought you to the right place." She turned to face him fully. In the dancing light, her eyes seemed to hold all the warmth missing from her captivity. "You could still walk away," she whispered. "Leave me here. Tell yourself it wasn't your fight." Instead of answering with words, Jake reached up to touch her cheek. Her skin was soft beneath his rough palm. When she leaned into the touch, something big shifted between them. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The kiss that followed felt as natural as sunrise. Soft at first, careful, then deeper as she responded. Her hands found their way to his chest and he could feel her heart racing against his ribs. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The want in her eyes matched his own, but also something else. Trust, freely given for the first time. "The third time they come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it won't be to talk." Jake nodded, understanding. "Then we'll be ready." That night they slept in each other's arms for the first time. Not from cold or need, but from choice. The third fight came not with dawn but in the harsh light of midday. Jake had chosen his ground carefully. A box canyon with walls of red stone that would echo gunshots like thunder and offer only one way in or out. When the three riders appeared at the canyon mouth, their horses sweating and their faces grim, Jake was ready. He stood in the center of the canyon floor, rifle in hand, with Maria beside him. She'd braided her hair for battle and wore his shirt over the dress. But her stance was that of a warrior, not a victim. "You've cost me time and money, freight man," the leader shouted. His horse danced sideways. "This ends today." "Yes," Jake agreed, his voice carrying clearly across the space. "It does." The leader's hand dropped to his gun, but Jake's rifle was already rising. The shot, when it came, was precise. Close enough to the leader's horse to send the animal rearing, but not close enough to kill. Yet. "She's my wife," Jake called out, working the lever action. "That's all you need to know." "The next one aims higher," Maria added, her voice steady and sure. The leader looked between them. At Jake's steady aim. At Maria's defiant stance. Something in his face changed. The hungry confidence was gone, replaced by the knowledge that he'd pushed too far. "This ain't over," he snarled, but he was already backing his horse toward the canyon mouth. "Yes, it is," Jake said quietly. The three riders disappeared into the desert heat. The canyon fell silent except for the wind through the rocks. Maria turned to him. In her eyes he saw not just relief, but something deeper. A recognition that they'd crossed a line together and come out changed on the other side. "It's finished," she said. Jake lowered his rifle and reached for her hand. "The running's finished. Everything else is just beginning." That evening they made camp in a wide valley dotted with cottonwood trees. A stream cut silver through the grass. Jake looked out over the land and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of home. "This could be ours," he said, pointing toward the fertile ground, the clear water, the gentle hills that rolled away toward distant mountains. Maria walked to the stream's edge. Her shape was graceful against the sunset. The dress, worn soft from their journey, moved with her body like a second skin. When she turned back to him, something had settled in her face. A peace he'd never seen before. "It's the first place that doesn't feel like I'm just passing through." As the stars came out overhead, they sat by their campfire closer than they'd ever been. Maria had let down her hair and it fell in waves over her shoulders, catching the firelight like spun silk. The dress had slipped off one shoulder, showing the curve of her neck and the hollow of her throat. "In Apache tradition," she said softly, "when a woman chooses her man, She weaves him something that will tie their spirits together. Jake watched as she pulled out a strip of leather from her bundle. Soft hide she'd been working on during their travels, decorated with small beads and patterns he didn't recognize but somehow understood. "I have no silver to offer," he said, taking the leather band. "No church or preacher." "I need neither," she replied. "Only your promise." He tied the band around her wrist, his fingers staying on the pulse point where her heart beat strong and steady. "I promise to honor you, to protect you, to build something with you that's ours alone." When she kissed him this time, it was with the full weight of choice behind it. Not gratitude or need, but desire freely given. Her hands found the buttons of his shirt and he felt her fingers tremble slightly as she worked them open. "Are you certain?" he asked, covering her hands with his own. Her answer was to lean forward and press her lips to his chest, just over his heart. "I've never been more certain of anything." What followed was tender and fierce by turns. A claiming and a surrender. A promise made flesh in the dancing firelight. With the vast desert stretching away on all sides, they came together not as strangers thrown together by chance, but as two souls who'd found their match. Later, as they lay tangled together beneath the stars, Maria traced lazy patterns on Jake's chest with her fingertip. "What will we build here?" she asked. "Whatever you want," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "A cabin by the stream. A garden. Maybe horses if we can manage it. Children?" The question was barely a whisper. Jake's arm tightened around her. "If we're blessed." She lifted her head to look at him. In her eyes he saw not just love, but hope. The kind he thought was lost to him forever. "Then we'd better get started," she said, and pulled his head down for another kiss. 6 months later the cabin stood solid and true beside the stream. Its logs were fitted tight against winter winds. Maria's garden had grown well and the root cellar was full of preserved vegetables, dried meat, and the promise of plenty. Jake had built corrals for the horses they'd managed to buy and trade for. Good stock that would serve them well as they expanded their small ranch. But the greatest change was in themselves. Maria moved through their home with the confident grace of a woman who belonged somewhere, who was valued not for her body's worth to others, but for her mind, her strength, her partnership. The haunted tiredness had left her eyes, replaced by contentment and purpose. Jake had found his own healing in their daily routines. The satisfaction of building something lasting. Of waking each morning to the woman he'd chosen and who'd chosen him in return. The nightmares of war had faded, replaced by dreams of the future they were creating together. On quiet evenings when the work was done and they sat by their own hearth, Maria would sometimes touch the leather band still tied around her wrist. Faded now from sun and work, but no less precious for its simplicity. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one such evening. "That day you opened the door." Jake looked up from the harness he was mending, his hands stilling on the leather. Outside, snow began to fall in fat, lazy flakes. But inside their cabin, warmth and love held winter at bay. "Never," he said simply. "It was the first door I ever opened that led me home." The West was still wild, still dangerous, still unforgiving to the weak or unlucky. But in their small corner of it, Jake and Maria had carved out something that belonged entirely to them. A love born of honor, forged in fire, and sealed with promises that would outlast the changing seasons of the frontier. Sometimes late at night, when the wind howled across the desert, they'd hear distant riders passing through the valley. But it no longer mattered who they were or what they sought. Those who would have torn them apart had lost their power the moment two hearts decided to beat as one.